There's something uniquely calming about mysteries that don't demand an answer. Not the loud, dramatic kind that insists on resolution, but the quiet ones. The ones that sit just outside the edges of understanding. The kind you can turn over slowly in your mind like a smooth stone, noticing the details, the patterns, the gaps, without ever needing to force a conclusion. Tonight, we're stepping into that space together, a place where fact and uncertainty overlap, where the world is still grounded and real, but not entirely explained. And as we move through these stories, the goal isn't to solve them. It's simply to observe, to think, and maybe to see them from an angle you haven't considered before. Before we go further, take a second to settle in. If you're new here, this is Sleepy Tin Foil Hat, where we explore the strange and the unexplained without jumping to conclusions or drifting into fantasy. If that sounds like your kind of thing, go ahead and subscribe. And I'm always curious, where are you listening from tonight? Let me know in the comments. There's something grounding about realizing how many different places these quiet questions reach. Now, when we talk about unexplained mysteries, there's often a tendency to divide them into two extremes. On one side, there's the mainstream explanation, the official version, built from available evidence, shaped by logic, science, and sometimes limitation. On the other side, there are the more speculative interpretations, the ideas that try to fill in the gaps, sometimes carefully, sometimes wildly. What's interesting isn't choosing one over the other. It's looking at where they don't quite line up. Because that space in between, that's where the real curiosity lives. So tonight we'll start with a mystery that is, in many ways, deceptively simple. No ancient civilizations disappearing overnight. No massive conspiracies spanning decades. Just a signal. A single, brief signal that arrived from space, was recorded, studied, and then never heard again. In 1977, at the Ohio State University Radio Observatory, a large radio telescope known as the Big Ear was quietly scanning the sky. It wasn't designed for dramatic discoveries. It didn't produce images, and it didn't track objects in real time. Instead, it collected data passively, recording radio signals from deep space as the Earth rotated. The data would print out as long streams of numbers and letters, each representing the intensity of signals detected at different frequencies. Most of the time, those printouts were uneventful. Background noise, cosmic static, predictable patterns that scientists understood well enough to categorize and move past. But on August 15th, something changed. A signal appeared in the data that was different. It was strong, significantly stronger than the surrounding noise. It lasted for 72 seconds, which, interestingly, was exactly the amount of time a signal from a fixed point in space would remain within the telescope's detection range as the Earth rotated. And its frequency was close to 1,420 megahertz, a very specific number that matters in astronomy. This frequency corresponds to the hydrogen line, the natural radio emission of hydrogen atoms, the most abundant element in the universe. Because of that, many scientists had speculated that if an intelligent civilization wanted to send a signal that would be universally recognizable, they might choose that exact frequency. Not because it's exotic, but because it's fundamental. It's something any technologically capable society studying the universe would likely notice. When astronomer Jerry Amon reviewed the data days later, he circled the unusual sequence of characters on the printout and wrote a single word next to it: "Wow." And that's what the signal has been called ever since. Now, the mainstream explanation begins here, and it's important to walk through it carefully. First, scientists looked for natural sources. Could this have been a known cosmic phenomenon? Pulsars, quasars, or other astronomical objects can produce strong radio emissions, but those signals tend to repeat, or at least show patterns over time. This one didn't. It appeared once, and never again. Next, they considered terrestrial interference. Could it have come from Earth? A satellite? A military transmission? Or some kind of accidental signal bouncing into the telescope's range? At the time, this was a strong possibility. However, the signal's characteristics didn't quite match typical human-made interference. It was narrowband, meaning it occupied a very specific frequency range, and it didn't drift in frequency the way you'd expect from something moving relative to the observer. Still, didn't quite match isn't the same as impossible. And over the years, more grounded explanations have been proposed. One idea suggested that the signal might have come from a comet, specifically hydrogen clouds surrounding a comet passing through the region of space being observed. Since hydrogen emits at that key frequency, it could, in theory, produce a signal similar to what was detected. This explanation gained attention because it didn't require unknown physics or external intelligence. It stayed within known phenomena. But there's a complication. At the time of the WOW signal, the comets proposed as the source hadn't yet been discovered, so their positions had to be calculated retroactively. And when other astronomers attempted to observe similar signals from those same comets later on, the results were inconclusive. Some detected weak emissions. Others didn't find anything significant. So the comet explanation remains possible, but not definitive. And that's where things start to get interesting. Because if you step back for a moment, the mystery isn't just about what the signal was. It's about what didn't happen afterward. There was no repeat, no follow-up detection, no additional data points to build a clearer picture. In science, repetition is everything. One data point is a curiosity. Multiple data points become a pattern, and patterns lead to understanding. But here, we're left with a single moment in time, a signal that fits some expectations of what an intentional transmission might look like, but also fits, at least partially, within the range of natural explanations. And that creates a kind of tension. If it were clearly artificial, we'd expect more. If it were clearly natural, we'd expect repetition. Instead, it sits right in the middle. Not confirming anything, but not fully dismissing anything either. Some researchers have pointed out that the Big Ear telescope wasn't capable of tracking signals in real time. It relied on Earth's rotation to scan the sky. So if a signal were intermittent, or directional, or simply not repeated at the right moment, it could easily be missed on subsequent passes. In other words, the absence of a second detection doesn't necessarily mean the source disappeared. It might just mean we weren't looking at the right time. That idea opens up a subtle but important possibility. Not that the signal was something extraordinary, but that our ability to observe it was limited. And that's a theme you'll notice again and again as we go through these mysteries. Not just what we see, but how we see it. The tools we use, the assumptions we bring, the gaps in observation that shape what we think is happening. Because sometimes, the mystery isn't in the event itself. It's in the edges of our understanding of it. Over the decades, the WOW signal has become a kind of quiet icon in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Not because it proves anything, but because it represents a moment where the data didn't neatly resolve. A moment where the universe, briefly, didn't behave in a way we could fully explain. And maybe that's why it remains so compelling. Not as evidence of something specific, but as a reminder that even with all our instruments, all our models, all our accumulated knowledge, there are still signals we don't quite understand. Not everything repeats, not everything fits, and not everything needs to be solved immediately to be worth thinking about. So as we move forward, Keep that in mind. We're not here to decide what these mysteries mean. We're here to look at them carefully, to notice what's known, what's assumed, and what remains open. Because sometimes, the most relaxing place to be is right in that space between certainty and possibility. If you sit with that idea for a moment, the space between certainty and possibility, it starts to feel less like a gap that needs to be filled, and more like a place you can explore without urgency. And there's another mystery that lives very comfortably in that space. One that, on the surface, feels much closer to home. Not a signal from deep space, but a pattern etched into the earth itself. Vast, deliberate, and quietly resistant to a single simple explanation. In the southern plains of Peru, stretching across dry desert terrain, there are enormous lines carved into the ground. Straight lines that run for miles, perfect geometric shapes, and most famously, massive figures depicting animals, a hummingbird, a spider, a monkey, among others. These are known as the Nazca lines, and they've been the subject of both careful study and wide speculation for nearly a century. The mainstream understanding begins with something surprisingly practical. The lines were created by the Nazca culture, which existed in the region between roughly 500 BCE and 500 CE. The method itself is relatively simple. The surface of the desert is covered with reddish-brown stones, oxidized over time. When those stones are moved aside, they reveal a lighter, almost yellowish soil underneath. By clearing away the darker rocks in specific patterns, the Nazca people effectively drew these lines into the landscape. Because the region is extremely dry, with little wind or rain, the lines have remained largely intact for hundreds, even thousands of years. There's no vegetation to obscure them, no erosion to wash them away. What was made long ago simply stayed. Archaeologists have spent decades studying these geoglyphs, and several grounded explanations have emerged. One of the most widely accepted ideas is that the lines had ceremonial or religious significance. Some of them align with water sources or ancient pathways, suggesting they may have been part of rituals connected to water, a critical resource in such an arid environment. Others appear to form processional routes, wide enough for groups of people to walk along, possibly as part of organized ceremonies. There's also evidence that the Nazca people used simple tools and techniques to create these designs with surprising precision. Wooden stakes found at some sites suggest they may have used them as markers, along with basic surveying methods to map out the lines. So while the scale of the figures is enormous, some stretching hundreds of meters, the process itself doesn't require advanced technology, just planning, coordination, and time. From that perspective, the Nazca lines are not a mystery in terms of how they were made. The tools, the materials, and the methods all fit within what we know about the culture that created them. But that's only part of the picture. Because when you shift the question slightly, from how to why, the clarity begins to soften. One of the most commonly discussed aspects of the Nazca lines is their visibility. Many of the figures are so large that they can only be fully appreciated from above. From ground level, you might see a segment of a line, a curve, or an edge, but not the full image. It's only when viewed from the air that the shapes resolve into recognizable forms. Now, the mainstream explanation addresses this as well. Researchers suggest that the Nazca people didn't need to see the designs from above in order to create them. With careful planning and scaled drawings, it's entirely possible to construct large figures that only make sense when viewed at a distance. Think of it like a mural painted on a massive surface. The artist doesn't need to step back far enough to see the entire piece at once, as long as the proportions are maintained. There's also the idea that the figures were meant to be seen by deities. or at least symbolically presented to the sky. In that context, their visibility from above isn't a practical requirement, but a spiritual one. And yet, there's a subtle tension here. Because while it's true that large-scale designs can be created without aerial perspective, it still raises questions about intent. Why choose forms that only fully resolve from a viewpoint that, at the time, humans didn't physically occupy? Why invest such effort into shapes that remain partially hidden from the people who made them? It's not that this contradicts the mainstream explanation. It just doesn't fully settle the question. Over time, more speculative interpretations have emerged. Some have suggested that the lines were created as markers for celestial events, that certain shapes or alignments correspond to the positions of stars, constellations, or the movement of the sun and moon. This idea has been explored in detail, and while a few alignments appear suggestive, the overall evidence is mixed. Many lines don't correspond to any known astronomical patterns, and some alignments could simply be coincidental, given the sheer number of lines present. Other theories have ventured further, proposing that the Nazca lines were landing strips or signals intended for extraterrestrial visitors. This idea gained popularity in the mid-20th century, especially through the work of Erich von Däniken, who argued that ancient civilizations may have had contact with advanced beings. The scale and precision of the lines, combined with their visibility from the air, were presented as evidence supporting that possibility. But when examined closely, this interpretation faces several challenges. The lines themselves are not suitable as landing strips. They're too shallow, too narrow, and often intersect in ways that would make landing impractical. There's also no physical evidence of advanced technology or materials associated with the site. From a strictly evidential standpoint, the extraterrestrial explanation introduces more assumptions than it resolves. Still, its persistence is worth noting, not because it's necessarily correct, but because it highlights something about how we interpret the unknown. When a structure or pattern doesn't immediately fit into our expectations, there's a tendency to look for explanations that match the scale of the mystery. Large, intricate designs invite large, intricate theories. But sometimes the reality is more subtle. And that brings us back to a quieter, more grounded line of thinking. One that doesn't try to replace the mainstream explanation, but instead expands the context around it. What if the Nazca lines weren't meant to be seen in the way we assume? What if their purpose wasn't visual in the conventional sense, but experiential? Walking the lines, following their paths, participating in the act of moving through them, rather than observing them as complete images. In that interpretation, the scale still matters, but not for aerial visibility. It matters because it shapes how people interact with the space. A line that stretches for miles becomes a journey. A geometric shape becomes a route. The figures themselves, while recognizable from above, might function differently at ground level, as parts of a larger system of movement, ritual, and orientation. There's some support for this idea in the physical layout of the lines. Many of them are continuous, unbroken paths. Some intersect in ways that suggest intentional routes rather than isolated drawings. And when archaeologists have walked these lines, they've noted how the experience changes depending on direction, time of day, and position relative to the surrounding landscape. It's not a definitive explanation, but it shifts the focus slightly, from image to interaction. And once again, we find ourselves in that familiar space. We know how the lines were made. We have strong evidence-based ideas about their cultural context. But when it comes to their full meaning, their intended use, their deeper purpose, there's still room for interpretation. Not infinite room, Not anything goes, but enough space to ask questions without forcing answers. Because the more you look at something like the Nazca Lines, the more you realize that the mystery isn't just in their existence. It's in the assumptions we bring when we try to understand them. The idea that visibility equals purpose, that scale implies function, that patterns must resolve into something immediately clear. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they remain partially out of reach, not because they're beyond understanding entirely, but because we're only seeing them from one angle. So as we move forward, keep that in mind, not just what these mysteries are, but how perspective shapes what they seem to be. Because the next one shifts that perspective again. There's a quiet pattern starting to emerge, and it's easy to miss if you're not looking for it. A signal that appears once and never repeats. Lines in the desert that can be walked but not fully seen from the ground. In both cases, the mystery isn't just the thing itself, it's the limitation of perspective. What we can observe is only a slice of what might actually be happening. And when you carry that idea forward, it leads us naturally to another phenomenon. One that unfolds not in a fixed location but in motion. Something witnessed across oceans and skies, reported for centuries, and still not entirely pinned down. They're called ghost ships. Now, the term itself can sound dramatic, almost theatrical, but the underlying accounts are often surprisingly grounded. Ships found adrift with no crew aboard. Vessels spotted at sea under unusual conditions, sometimes appearing intact, sometimes damaged, sometimes simply out of place. These stories go back hundreds of years, recorded in ship logs, naval reports, and first-hand testimonies. And while many have been explained over time, a small number remain, just uncertain enough to keep resurfacing. One of the most well-known examples is the Mary Celeste. In December of 1872, this merchant ship was discovered in the Atlantic Ocean, drifting between the Azores and the coast of Portugal. It wasn't wrecked, it wasn't sinking. In fact, it was largely intact. Its cargo, barrels of industrial alcohol, was still on board. The crew's personal belongings were mostly undisturbed. There were no signs of violence, no clear evidence of struggle. And yet, every single person aboard was gone. The last log entry, dated about 10 days earlier, placed the ship hundreds of miles away from where it was eventually found. The lifeboat was missing, suggesting that the crew had left the vessel voluntarily. But why? And under what circumstances? The mainstream explanations are careful, and they've evolved over time. One of the leading theories involves the cargo itself. Industrial alcohol can produce fumes, and in certain conditions, those fumes could create pressure within the barrels, or even small explosions. There's a hypothesis that the crew may have feared a larger explosion was imminent, prompting them to abandon ship temporarily in the lifeboat. It's a reasonable idea. If you're on a vessel carrying volatile cargo, and something suggests it might ignite, the safest immediate response could be to create distance. But there's a complication. The ship was found with its hatches intact, and no significant signs of fire or explosion. If there had been a dangerous buildup of fumes, it either didn't result in visible damage, or the threat passed without leaving clear evidence. Another explanation points to environmental conditions. Sudden storms, rogue waves, or even waterspouts could have created a situation where the crew believed the ship was in immediate danger. In that scenario, abandoning ship might have seemed like the only option, even if, in hindsight, it wasn't necessary. But again, the details don't fully align. The ship wasn't heavily damaged. Its sails were set in a way that suggested it had been under control at some point after the last log entry. And perhaps most puzzling of all, no trace of the lifeboat or the crew was ever found. So we're left with a sequence of events that makes partial sense, but not complete sense. A decision was made. It may have been rational in the moment, but the outcome, a fully intact ship drifting without its crew, remains difficult to reconstruct with certainty. And this is where the pattern we've been noticing starts to deepen, because the mystery of the Mary Celeste isn't just about what happened on board. It's about the absence of information, the missing 10 days between the last log entry and the ship's discovery, the lack of physical evidence pointing clearly in one direction, the silence where there should be something. Over time, more speculative ideas have been layered onto the story. Some suggest piracy, though there's little evidence to support it. Others propose more unusual scenarios, from sea creatures to time anomalies, but these tend to drift away from grounded analysis and into territory that doesn't hold up under scrutiny. Still, even within a grounded framework, there are questions worth sitting with. For example, decision-making under uncertainty. Imagine you're part of that crew. You detect something unusual, a smell, a sound, a shift in the cargo. You don't have modern instruments. You don't have immediate communication with anyone outside the ship. You have to interpret the situation based on limited information, and you have to act quickly. In that context, the line between caution and overreaction becomes very thin. It's possible that the crew made a decision that, given what they perceived at the time, was entirely logical. But that decision depended on assumptions that may not have been accurate. And once they left the ship, even briefly, conditions could have changed in ways that made return impossible. A sudden shift in wind, a separation between the lifeboat and the vessel, small variables that, in the open ocean, can become decisive. This doesn't solve the mystery, but it reframes it slightly. Instead of asking, what strange force removed the crew, we might ask, what sequence of reasonable decisions could lead to an irreversible outcome? And when you look at it that way, the mystery becomes less about a single event and more about a chain of events, each one understandable on its own, but together producing a result that feels disproportionate. And the Mary Celeste isn't alone in this category. There have been other reports over the years of vessels found abandoned under unusual circumstances, some with clear explanations: storms, mechanical failure, human error. Others, less so. The SS Urang Medan is one such case, though its very existence is debated. According to the story, a distress signal was received from a ship in the Strait of Malacca, with a message describing the crew as dead or dying under unknown conditions. When rescuers boarded the vessel, they reportedly found the crew lifeless, with expressions suggesting fear and no obvious cause of death. Shortly after, the ship is said to have caught fire and sunk, eliminating the possibility of further investigation. Now, from a mainstream perspective, this account is treated with caution. The records are inconsistent. There's limited verifiable documentation. It may be a misreported incident, or even a constructed narrative that gained traction over time. And that's an important reminder. Not every mystery is rooted in a confirmed event. Some exist because of how stories are told, retold, and gradually shaped. But even if we set that case aside, the broader pattern remains. The ocean, by its nature, is a place where observation is limited. Conditions change quickly. Evidence can disappear. And when something unusual happens, the ability to reconstruct it later is often incomplete. So once again, we find ourselves in that familiar position. We have data, but not enough. We have plausible explanations, but not definitive ones. We have patterns, but no single framework that accounts for every detail. And rather than forcing a conclusion, there's something almost calming about allowing that uncertainty to remain. because it reflects something real about how the world works. Not everything is recorded perfectly. Not every event leaves a clear trace. And sometimes, the most accurate answer isn't a definitive statement, but a range of possibilities, each with its own strengths and limitations. So as we move forward, keep that in mind. The idea that a mystery doesn't have to be solved to be understood better. That examining the edges of what we know can be just as valuable as filling in the center, because the next mystery shifts us again, from the ocean to something much closer to home, something people experience directly, and yet struggle to fully explain. There's something different about a mystery when it doesn't happen far away, when it isn't locked in the past or drifting somewhere out at sea, but instead occurs in a place that feels familiar. A bedroom, a quiet night, the kind of environment where everything should be predictable, safe, understood. And yet, for countless people across cultures, across time, there's a specific experience that seems to interrupt that sense of normalcy in a very consistent way. It usually begins the same. You wake up, or at least you think you do. The room looks exactly as it should. The lighting, the layout, the subtle shapes of furniture in the dark. Everything is in place. There's no immediate sense that anything is wrong. But then you try to move, and you can't. Your body feels completely unresponsive, as if it's been disconnected from your intentions. Breathing becomes something you're suddenly aware of, sometimes shallow, sometimes heavy. And then, in many cases, there's something else. A presence, not always seen clearly, but felt. Sometimes it takes form, a figure in the corner of the room or near the bed. Sometimes it's just a pressure, or the sense that something is watching. This experience is widely known as sleep paralysis, and from a scientific perspective, it's actually fairly well understood, at least in terms of its mechanics. During normal sleep, particularly in the REM phase, the brain becomes highly active. This is the stage where most vivid dreaming occurs. To prevent the body from physically acting out those dreams, the brain essentially switches off voluntary muscle movement. This state is called REM atonia. It's a built-in safety mechanism, and it works quietly in the background every night. Sleep paralysis happens when that mechanism doesn't quite switch off at the right time. In other words, the mind wakes up, but the body remains in that paralyzed state. That alone explains the inability to move. It also accounts for the heightened awareness of breathing and the general sense of vulnerability. But what about the presence? The figures? The very specific, often unsettling experiences that people report? Here, the mainstream explanation points to something called hypnopompic or hypnagogic hallucinations, depending on whether they occur upon waking or falling asleep. These are essentially dream elements that persist into waking consciousness. The brain, still partially in a dreaming state, projects imagery and sensations into what feels like the real environment. And there's strong evidence supporting this. Brain imaging studies show that during sleep paralysis episodes, areas of the brain associated with fear and threat detection, particularly the amygdala, can be highly active. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate rational thought, may not be fully engaged yet. So you have a situation where the brain is generating vivid, often threatening imagery, without the usual filters that would question or contextualize it. That combination can produce experiences that feel incredibly real. So from a scientific standpoint, sleep paralysis is not a mystery in the traditional sense. The mechanisms are known. The triggers are understood. Things like irregular sleep patterns, stress, sleep deprivation, even sleeping position can increase the likelihood of an episode. But as with the other mysteries we've looked at, understanding the mechanism doesn't necessarily resolve every aspect of the experience. Because when you start to look at the reports themselves, something interesting begins to emerge. Across different cultures, across different time periods, people describe remarkably similar encounters. In medieval Europe, there are accounts of a figure known as the night hag, a presence that sits on the chest, preventing movement and creating a sense of suffocation. In Japan, the experience is referred to as kanashibari, often involving a similar inability to move and the sensation of a presence in the room. In parts of the Middle East, there are stories of shadowy beings associated with the experience. In modern contexts, some people describe what they interpret as alien encounters, figures standing near the bed, observing, sometimes interacting. Now, the mainstream explanation addresses this consistency as well. The human brain shares common structures and responses, especially when it comes to fear and perception. In a state where the brain is partially dreaming and partially awake, it may default to certain archetypal forms, humanoid figures, shadows, presences, because those are the shapes our minds are most primed to recognize. There's also the role of expectation and cultural influence. If someone grows up hearing stories about a particular type of entity, that imagery may influence how their brain constructs the experience during sleep paralysis. Over time, these narratives can reinforce themselves, creating patterns that appear universal but are actually shaped by shared human psychology. That's the grounded view. And it explains a lot, but not everything, because even when accounting for neurological processes and cultural context, there are still aspects of these experiences that remain difficult to fully categorize. For example, the sense of presence is often described as being more than just visual. People report a feeling that something is there, even before they see anything. A kind of awareness that doesn't rely on sight or sound. In neuroscience, this is sometimes linked to disruptions in the brain's body schema, the internal map that tells you where your body is in space and what's around it. When that map becomes unstable, the brain may project a presence as a way of reconciling conflicting signals. It's a compelling explanation, but it also raises a subtle question. Why does that projection so often take on a form that feels intentional? Not just a vague sensation, but something that seems to observe, to react, to exist independently within the experience. And this is where the line between explanation and interpretation starts to blur. Because from one perspective, the brain is simply generating a scenario based on its internal state, a kind of waking dream shaped by biology and context. From another perspective, the consistency and intensity of these experiences invite a different kind of question. Not necessarily that something external is present, but that our understanding of perception, especially in transitional states of consciousness, might be incomplete. There's also the question of memory. Sleep paralysis episodes are often remembered with unusual clarity. People can recall details of the room, the position of objects, the sequence of events. And while memory is always subject to reconstruction and bias, the vividness of these recollections can make the experience feel more grounded, more anchored in reality. At the same time, studies have shown that memory during these states can be influenced by suggestion, expectation, and emotional intensity. So what feels like a precise recollection may still be shaped by the brain's attempt to make sense of a confusing event. Once again, we're not looking at a contradiction, but a layering of possibilities, a neurological framework that explains the core mechanics, a psychological layer that shapes the content, and then a residual space where certain aspects don't fit perfectly into either category, not enough to overturn the mainstream view, but enough to keep the question open. And maybe that's the most interesting part. Because sleep paralysis is something people experience directly. It's not a distant signal or an ancient structure. It's immediate, personal. And for those who go through it, it often leaves a lasting impression, not just of fear, but of curiosity. What exactly happened in that moment? Was it entirely internal, entirely explainable within current models of the brain? Or is there something about the way consciousness transitions between states that we don't fully grasp yet? There's no need to jump to conclusions. The evidence we have strongly supports a neurological explanation. But as with the other mysteries we've explored, there's value in noticing where that explanation feels complete and where it feels like it's still developing. Because understanding isn't always a fixed point. Sometimes it's a process, a gradual refinement of ideas as new observations are made, new connections are considered. And in the quiet moments, like this one, there's something almost grounding about acknowledging that process, about recognizing that even familiar experiences can hold layers we haven't fully explored. So as we move on, keep that sense of curiosity steady, not urgent, not demanding answers, just attentive. Because the next mystery shifts again, away from individual experience and into something that appears, disappears, and leaves very little behind. There's a certain kind of mystery that doesn't leave behind a structure or a signal or even a clear memory. Instead, it leaves an absence, something that was there, observed, sometimes even tracked, and then, without a clear transition, simply gone. No debris, no consistent pattern, no single explanation that holds in every case. And when you start to look at these events collectively, they begin to form a quiet category of their own, not defined by what we can study afterward, but by what we can't. One of the most persistent examples of this kind of mystery exists in a region of the Atlantic Ocean, commonly referred to as the Bermuda Triangle. It's not an officially recognized boundary, and depending on who you ask, its exact limits can shift. But it's generally described as the area between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. Over the decades, this region has been associated with a number of disappearances, ships, aircraft, and in some cases, entire crews. Now, before we move any further, it's important to ground this in what's verifiable. The ocean is vast, unpredictable, and often dangerous. Storms can develop quickly. Navigation errors can compound over long distances. Mechanical failures, human misjudgment, and environmental factors all play a role in maritime and aviation incidents. And statistically, when researchers have examined traffic through the Bermuda Triangle, they found that it's one of the busiest shipping and flight corridors in the world. That alone increases the likelihood of incidents simply due to volume. From that perspective, the mainstream explanation is straightforward. The number of disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle is not significantly higher than in other heavily traveled regions. Many of the incidents attributed to it have been exaggerated, misreported, or later explained through conventional means. Some ships encountered severe weather. Some aircraft experienced instrument failure. Others may have simply run out of fuel or become disoriented. And yet, despite this grounded framework, the idea of the Bermuda Triangle persists. Part of that comes down to a few specific cases that resist easy explanation, or at least resist complete explanation. One of the most frequently cited is the case of Flight 19. In December of 1945, 5 US Navy training aircraft took off from Fort Lauderdale on a routine mission. The weather was reported to be generally favorable, and the pilots were experienced. But during the flight, something began to go wrong. Radio transmissions from the lead pilot indicated confusion about their position. He believed they were over the Florida Keys, but based on other data, they may have actually been over the Bahamas. Compasses were reportedly malfunctioning, or at least not behaving as expected. The pilots became disoriented, unsure of which direction would lead them back to base. As time passed, fuel became a critical factor. Eventually, communication was lost, and the planes never returned. A rescue aircraft was sent out shortly afterward, and it too disappeared. Now, the mainstream explanation for Flight 19 focuses on navigational error compounded by environmental conditions. The region is known for sudden weather changes, and even experienced pilots can become disoriented if their instruments fail or provide conflicting information. The ocean below offers few visual reference points, especially if visibility drops. In such situations, small errors in direction can lead to increasingly larger deviations over time. There's also the possibility that the lead pilot, believing his instruments were malfunctioning, may have relied on instinct or memory, which, under stress, can be unreliable. If the group followed his lead, that error could have been amplified across all 5 aircraft. As for the rescue plane, it's believed that it may have experienced a separate issue, possibly an explosion due to fuel vapor, which was a known risk in certain aircraft models at the time. Individually, these explanations are plausible. They don't require unknown forces or unexplained physics. They fit within what we understand about aviation, weather, and human decision-making. But when you look at the sequence as a whole, the overlapping uncertainties, the loss of both the training flight and the rescue mission, it creates a narrative that feels incomplete, not incorrect, just not entirely resolved. And this is where the Bermuda Triangle, as a concept, begins to take shape. Because it's not just one event, it's a collection of events, each with its own explanation, but all sharing a similar pattern: disappearance without clear recovery. Over time, these cases have been grouped together, creating a sense of continuity, even if the underlying causes are different. Some researchers have proposed environmental factors unique to the region. One idea involves methane gas hydrates, pockets of methane trapped beneath the ocean floor. Under certain conditions, these could be released suddenly, reducing the density of the water and potentially causing ships to lose buoyancy. In theory, this could lead to rapid sinking without much warning. For aircraft, methane releases could also affect air density, potentially interfering with engine performance. But while this is an interesting hypothesis, the evidence for large-scale methane releases causing documented incidents in the Bermuda Triangle is limited. It's a possibility, but not a widely confirmed one. Another factor often discussed is the region's magnetic anomalies. Some reports suggest that compasses behave unusually in the area, deviating from true north in ways that could confuse navigation. However, similar magnetic variations exist in other parts of the world, and modern navigation systems are designed to account for them. So again, we return to a familiar place. Each individual explanation holds up reasonably well on its own. Weather, human error, mechanical issues, environmental conditions, none of them require anything outside established science. But when these explanations are layered over a series of events that share a common theme, the sense of mystery remains. And that raises an interesting question. Is the Bermuda Triangle a true anomaly, or is it an example of how patterns emerge from the way we group information? In other words, if we took similar incidents from different parts of the world and viewed them together, would they feel just as mysterious? Or is there something about this specific region, its history, its reputation, that amplifies our perception of the unknown? There's also the role of documentation. Many of the most famous Bermuda Triangle stories gained popularity in the mid-20th century through books, articles, and media coverage that emphasized the unexplained aspects while sometimes downplaying or omitting the more mundane details. Over time, These narratives became part of a larger cultural framework, shaping how new incidents were interpreted. That doesn't mean the events didn't happen. It means the context in which they were presented may have influenced how they were understood. And that's a subtle but important distinction, because it suggests that the mystery isn't just in the disappearances themselves, but in the way information is filtered, shared, and remembered. Still, even with that awareness, there's something about the idea of a place where things vanish that continues to hold attention. Not because it proves anything unusual, but because it touches on a deeper uncertainty. The idea that there are environments where our ability to observe and recover information is limited. The ocean, especially in that region, is vast and deep. Wreckage can sink quickly, disperse, or remain undiscovered for years. Aircraft, once downed, may leave very little trace on the surface, and without clear evidence, reconstruction becomes speculative. So once again, we're left with a balance, a grounded understanding of the factors involved, and a recognition that in some cases, those factors don't produce a complete picture. Not every disappearance is mysterious, but some remain just open enough to keep the question alive. And maybe that's the thread connecting all of these stories so far. Not that they defy explanation entirely, but that they sit at the edge of it, where what we know meets what we can't quite confirm. So as we move forward, let that idea settle in, not as something unsettling, but as something steady, a reminder that uncertainty isn't always something to eliminate. Sometimes it's something to observe, because the next mystery brings us back in time again, but in a way that challenges not just what we know, but how we interpret the past itself. There's a subtle shift that happens when a mystery isn't just about an event, but about time itself. Not in the sense of science fiction or dramatic leaps, but in a quieter, more grounded way. When something appears to exist out of place. Not impossible, not magical, just difficult to situate neatly within the timeline we think we understand. And when that happens, the question becomes less about what the object is, and more about how it fits into the larger picture of history. One of the most often discussed examples of this kind of puzzle is the Antikythera mechanism. It was discovered in 1901 among the remains of a shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera. At first glance, it didn't look like much, a collection of corroded bronze fragments, heavily encrusted and fragmented by time under the sea. But as researchers began to examine it more closely, something unexpected started to emerge. Inside those fragments were gears, not simple ones, but a complex arrangement of interlocking bronze gears, with teeth cut in a way that suggested deliberate, precise engineering. As the mechanism was gradually reconstructed and studied using modern imaging techniques, including X-ray tomography, it became clear that this device was capable of something remarkable for its time. It could model astronomical cycles, predicting the positions of the sun, the moon, and possibly even the planets. It could track eclipses. It encoded cycles like the Metonic cycle, which links lunar months to solar years. In essence, it functioned as a kind of analog computer. Now, from a mainstream historical perspective, the Antikythera mechanism is not evidence of lost advanced technology or anything outside the known capabilities of ancient civilizations. Greek scholars, particularly in the Hellenistic period, had a sophisticated understanding of mathematics and astronomy. Figures like Archimedes and Hipparchus contributed to a body of knowledge that was far more advanced than is sometimes assumed. So the existence of a device that models astronomical cycles is not, in itself, inconsistent with what we know about that era. But here's where the tension begins to form. While the knowledge may have existed, the implementation of that knowledge in such a precise mechanical form is something we don't see again for many centuries. The level of craftsmanship in the gears, their size, their arrangement, the way they translate rotational motion into predictive output, suggests a degree of technological development that doesn't appear widely in other surviving artifacts from the same period. In fact, comparable mechanical complexity doesn't re-emerge in Europe until the development of advanced clockwork in the medieval period, more than 1,000 years later. So the question becomes, where did this come from? One possibility is that the Antikythera mechanism was not unique, but simply the only one that survived. The conditions of the shipwreck may have preserved it in a way that other similar devices used on land did not endure. Bronze was often melted down and reused, especially in times of scarcity. Delicate mechanisms could have been lost, destroyed, or repurposed over time. In that scenario, the mechanism represents a broader tradition of engineering that we've only glimpsed through this single example. That's a reasonable explanation. It fits within the framework of known history, while accounting for the lack of additional artifacts. But it also relies on an assumption that such a tradition existed, even though direct evidence of it is limited. Another possibility is that the Antikythera mechanism was an outlier, a product of a specific group of individuals, perhaps working in a particular context where knowledge, resources, and craftsmanship converged in a way that wasn't widely replicated. In other words, a peak, rather than a widespread baseline. History does allow for that. There are moments where innovation appears in concentrated forms, breakthroughs that don't immediately spread or persist. But even in those cases, we often see traces, intermediate steps, related developments, or parallel efforts. With the Antikythera mechanism, those traces are relatively sparse, and that's where the sense of mystery begins to settle in. Not because the device is inexplicable, but because its context is incomplete. We understand what it does. We have a good idea of how it works. But the broader system that produced it, the network of knowledge, tools, and practices, is only partially visible. Over time, more speculative ideas have been proposed. Some suggest that the mechanism points to a lost civilization with advanced technological capabilities. Others propose that knowledge from earlier cultures may have been transmitted in ways that we don't fully understand. These interpretations often extend beyond the available evidence, introducing elements that aren't supported by the archaeological record. From a grounded perspective, it's more cautious to say that the Antikythera mechanism reveals a level of sophistication in ancient engineering that challenges our assumptions, without requiring us to abandon the framework of established history. But even within that cautious approach, there's room for deeper reflection, because the mechanism highlights something fundamental about how we interpret the past. We tend to think of technological progress as a steady, linear process, one advancement building clearly on the last. But history doesn't always move in straight lines. Knowledge can be lost, rediscovered, or confined to specific regions or groups. Innovations can appear, disappear, and reappear under different circumstances. In that sense, the Antikythera mechanism isn't just an isolated object. It's a reminder that our picture of history is shaped by what survives and what doesn't. And that introduces a kind of quiet uncertainty. Not dramatic, not destabilizing, but present. Because for every artifact we find, there may be countless others that didn't endure. For every piece of knowledge that was recorded, there may be others that were transmitted orally or simply forgotten. So when we encounter something like this mechanism, something that seems slightly ahead of its time, slightly out of place, it invites us to reconsider the boundaries we've drawn around what was possible. Not to erase those boundaries entirely, but to recognize that they may be more flexible than we assumed, and once again, we find ourselves in that familiar position. The mainstream explanation provides a strong foundation. It tells us that the Antikythera mechanism is a product of known historical capabilities, a remarkable but not impossible achievement. At the same time, the gaps in context, the absence of similar devices, the limited evidence of a broader tradition, leave space for questions. Not answers, just questions. And in that space, there's something almost steadying, because it reflects the nature of knowledge itself, always expanding, always refining, always shaped by what we uncover next. So as we move forward, keep that perspective in mind. Not just what these mysteries are, but what they reveal about the way we understand the world. Because the next one brings us back to the present, to something people see in the sky, something that appears suddenly, moves in ways that are sometimes difficult to interpret, and then disappears, often leaving behind more questions than answers. There's a particular kind of mystery that feels different from the others we've explored so far. Not because it's necessarily more complex or more significant, but because it unfolds in real time, in the present. It isn't confined to the past like an ancient artifact, or hidden in a distant environment like the deep ocean. It appears suddenly, often without warning, in the open sky. Something visible, sometimes recorded, sometimes tracked, and then, just as quietly, it's gone. Over the years, these observations have been described in many ways. For a long time, the most common term was UFO, or unidentified flying object. But more recently, the language has shifted towards something slightly more precise. UAP, or unidentified aerial phenomena. The change isn't just semantic. It reflects an effort, particularly within official and scientific communities, to approach these observations with a more neutral, less assumption-driven framework. One of the key organizations involved in this shift is the US Department of Defense, which has acknowledged that there are aerial encounters recorded by military personnel that remain unidentified, not necessarily inexplicable, but not fully explained with the data currently available. Some of the most widely discussed examples come from US Navy pilots, who, during routine training missions, encountered objects that behaved in ways they didn't immediately recognize. In one case, documented in what's often referred to as the Tic Tac incident, pilots observed an object that appeared to move rapidly, change direction abruptly, and operate without visible propulsion. Now, it's important to start with the grounded perspective. Modern military aircraft are equipped with advanced sensor systems, radar, infrared cameras, tracking software, all of which are designed to detect and analyze objects in the airspace. But like any system, they have limitations. Sensor data can be misinterpreted. Objects can appear to move in unusual ways due to parallax, the effect where the relative motion of an object changes depending on the observer's position. Atmospheric conditions can distort signals. Even highly trained pilots, operating under complex and sometimes stressful conditions, can misjudge distance, speed, or size. In many cases, what initially appears unusual can be explained through a combination of these factors. There's also the possibility of classified technology. Military organizations around the world are constantly developing and testing new systems, some of which are not publicly disclosed. An object that appears unfamiliar to one group of observers could, in theory, be part of a program that isn't widely known. So from a mainstream standpoint, UAPs are best understood as a category of observations that have not yet been identified. Not necessarily because they are beyond explanation, but because the available data is incomplete, ambiguous, or still under analysis. And yet, as with the other mysteries we've explored, the details create a certain kind of tension. Because some of these encounters involve multiple forms of data: visual observation, radar tracking, infrared imaging, all pointing to the presence of something that behaves in a way that doesn't immediately match known aircraft or natural phenomena. That doesn't mean the behavior is impossible. It means it's not yet fully understood, and that distinction matters. Over the past few years, reports released by official bodies have acknowledged that a small percentage of these incidents remain unresolved, not classified as foreign technology, not confirmed as natural phenomena, simply unidentified. Now, this is where speculation often begins to expand. Some interpretations suggest that these objects could represent advanced technology from other nations, systems that operate beyond what is publicly known. Others propose more unconventional ideas, including the possibility of non-human origin. These ideas tend to gain attention because they attempt to match the scale of the observed behavior with an equally significant explanation. But from a grounded perspective, it's important to approach these interpretations carefully. The absence of a clear explanation does not automatically point to an extraordinary one. At the same time, dismissing the observations entirely doesn't fully address the data that does exist. So once again, we find ourselves in that familiar middle ground. We know that unidentified aerial phenomena are real, in the sense that they are observed, recorded, and reported. That part is not in question. The question is what they represent. And when you look closely, another layer begins to emerge. Not just the objects themselves, but the process of observation. For example, many of these encounters occur in controlled environments, military training areas, where sensor systems are actively scanning the sky. This means that we're seeing a subset of observations filtered through specific technologies, in specific contexts. There may be other phenomena occurring outside those contexts that go unnoticed, simply because they're not being actively monitored. There's also the question of how data is interpreted. A radar return might indicate an object moving at a certain speed, but that interpretation depends on assumptions about distance and trajectory. Infrared imagery can show heat signatures, but those signatures can be affected by atmospheric conditions, sensor calibration, and other variables. So the data itself, while valuable, is not always straightforward. And that leads to a quieter, more reflective question. Not just, what are these objects? But how do we know what we're seeing? Because the way we observe something shapes how we understand it. If an object appears to accelerate rapidly, is it actually accelerating? Or is our perspective changing? If it seems to hover, is it stationary? Or moving in a way that aligns with our line of sight? These are not dismissive questions. They're part of the process of careful analysis. At the same time, there are cases where multiple lines of observation converge, where visual reports align with sensor data in ways that are harder to attribute to a single source of error. And in those cases, the uncertainty remains. Not overwhelming, not unmanageable, just present. And maybe that's what makes this category of mystery feel different. It's not something we're looking back on with limited records. It's something that's being actively studied, with new data being collected, new frameworks being developed. The understanding is evolving in real time. And that means the boundaries of the mystery are shifting as well. What was once considered unexplained might, over time, find a grounded explanation, and what remains unexplained might become more clearly defined as data improves. So rather than seeing UAPs as a fixed mystery, it might be more accurate to see them as part of an ongoing process, a category of observations that sits at the edge of current understanding, gradually being explored. And that brings us back to that steady, familiar place. Not knowing everything, but knowing enough to ask better questions. Because the goal here isn't to jump to conclusions, it's to stay with the evidence, to notice where it leads and where it doesn't. And as we move forward, we'll shift again, away from the sky and into something quieter, something that appears in remote places, sometimes recorded, sometimes witnessed, and then disappears, leaving behind traces that are just enough to suggest something happened, but not enough to fully explain it. There's a certain kind of mystery that doesn't arrive with clarity. It arrives in fragments, a shape seen briefly in the distance, tracks in the ground that weren't there before, a recording that captures something unusual, but not quite definitive. These aren't events that unfold in controlled environments or leave behind complete records. Instead, they exist on the edges of observation, just visible enough to be noticed, but not stable enough to be fully confirmed. And when you look at these kinds of reports over time, one pattern becomes clear. They tend to happen in remote places, forests, mountain ranges, areas where human presence is limited, where visibility is reduced, and where the natural environment itself introduces layers of complexity to what we see and hear. One of the most persistent examples of this kind of phenomenon is associated with a figure often referred to as Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch. Reports of large, upright, human-like creatures in forested regions of North America go back centuries, appearing in indigenous oral traditions long before they entered modern popular culture. In more recent decades, sightings have been reported across various states and provinces, often describing a tall, broad-shouldered figure covered in hair, moving through dense woodland areas. Now, from a mainstream scientific perspective, there is currently no confirmed evidence that such a species exists. No verified specimens, no clear DNA samples, no remains that can be conclusively identified as belonging to an unknown primate of that scale. And given what we understand about ecosystems, especially in North America, the existence of a large, undiscovered mammal would present significant challenges. Such a species would likely require a stable breeding population, a consistent food source, and a habitat capable of supporting it without leaving more substantial traces. So the default explanation for Bigfoot sightings tends to fall into a few grounded categories. Misidentification is one of the most common. In low visibility environments like forests, especially at a distance, it can be difficult to accurately judge size, shape, and movement. A bear standing on its hind legs, for example, can appear surprisingly human-like under certain conditions. Lighting, shadows, and terrain can all distort perception, turning familiar animals into something less recognizable. There's also the role of expectation and suggestion. Once a particular idea becomes part of cultural awareness, it can influence how ambiguous stimuli are interpreted. A sound in the woods, a fleeting silhouette, a set of tracks. These might be processed differently depending on what the observer is primed to expect. Hoaxes have also played a role. Over the years, there have been documented cases where footprints were fabricated or sightings were staged. These don't account for all reports, but they do contribute to the overall noise surrounding the phenomenon, making it more difficult to separate genuine observations from intentional deception. From that perspective, the Bigfoot mystery can be understood as a combination of natural misidentification, psychological factors, and occasional fabrication. But as with the other mysteries we've explored, the full picture isn't entirely settled by that explanation alone. Because when you look at the consistency of certain details across independent reports, something begins to stand out. Witnesses often describe similar characteristics, not just in appearance, but in behavior. The way the figure moves, the environments in which it's seen, the sense of distance maintained between the observer and the observed. These patterns don't prove the existence of a specific creature, but they do suggest that the experiences themselves follow a recognizable structure. And that raises an interesting question. Are these patterns emerging because people are describing the same underlying stimulus? or because the human brain tends to construct similar interpretations when faced with uncertainty in similar environments. It's a subtle distinction, but an important one, because if the source of the observation is consistent, say a particular animal or environmental condition, then we would expect reports to share certain features. But if the consistency comes from the way the brain processes ambiguous information, then the pattern might be internal rather than external. There's also the question of evidence that sits in a kind of grey area. For example, footprint casts have been collected over the years, some of which show anatomical details that are difficult to replicate convincingly. Features like dermal ridges, mid-tarsal breaks, elements that suggest a flexible foot structure, unlike that of humans wearing shoes. Some researchers have argued that these details point to something beyond simple hoaxing. But again, the evidence is not definitive. Replication studies have shown that similar features can be produced under certain conditions, intentionally or otherwise. And without a clear chain of custody or corroborating biological material, the interpretation remains open. Audio recordings present a similar situation. There are recordings of vocalizations, howls, knocks, calls captured in remote areas, some of which don't match known animal sounds in a straightforward way. But the natural world is acoustically complex. Sounds can travel, echo, and distort in ways that make identification challenging. Animals can produce a wide range of vocalizations, some of which are not well documented. So once again, we find ourselves balancing between what can be explained and what remains uncertain. And this is where the environment itself becomes part of the mystery. Forests, especially dense ones, are inherently limiting in terms of observation. Visibility is reduced. Sound behaves unpredictably. Movement is partially obscured. In such settings, the gap between what is present and what is perceived can widen significantly. And that gap is where these kinds of experiences tend to take shape. Not because something extraordinary is necessarily happening, but because the conditions allow for ambiguity to persist. At the same time, it's worth considering how much of the natural world remains underobserved. While it's unlikely that a large, undiscovered primate exists in North America without leaving clearer evidence, there are still species being identified in remote regions of the world. Smaller organisms, certainly, but the point remains, our understanding of ecosystems is not complete. So the idea of undiscovered life isn't inherently unreasonable. It just becomes increasingly constrained as the size and impact of that life increase. And that's where the Bigfoot question sits. Not impossible in the abstract, but increasingly difficult to support with the evidence currently available. Still, the persistence of the reports suggests that something is being experienced. Something is being seen, heard, or interpreted in a way that produces these consistent narratives. And perhaps the most grounded way to approach it is not to ask whether Bigfoot exists in the literal sense, but to ask what these experiences reveal about perception, environment, and expectation. Because when you strip away the labels, what you're left with is a series of encounters at the edge of visibility. Moments where the brain is trying to make sense of incomplete information, drawing on memory, context, and instinct to fill in the gaps. And sometimes, those gaps remain. Not because they're unsolvable, but because the conditions under which they occur don't allow for complete resolution. So once again, we arrive at that steady, familiar place. A mix of explanation and uncertainty. A recognition that not every question has a clear answer, and that the process of examining it can be just as meaningful as the answer itself. As we move on, the next mystery shifts away from the natural world and into something constructed, something designed, yet still not fully understood. A place built with intention, but whose purpose continues to be debated. There's a different kind of quiet when a mystery is built into something intentional. Not an event that happened unexpectedly, not a fleeting sighting or a disappearing signal, but a structure, something planned, constructed, and left behind. And yet, despite that intention, its purpose remains not entirely clear. It's a strange contrast, really. The idea that something could be created with precision and effort, meant to endure, and still leave us asking what, exactly, it was for. One of the most well-known examples of this kind of mystery is Stonehenge. Set on a windswept plain in southern England, it's a ring of massive standing stones, some weighing up to 25 tons, arranged in a pattern that feels deliberate, almost mathematical. The site has been studied extensively, excavated, analysed, mapped, and yet, even with all that attention, its full purpose remains open to interpretation. The mainstream understanding begins with what we can verify. Stonehenge was built in stages, over a long period of time, roughly between 3000 BCE and 2000 BCE. The earliest phase involved a circular ditch and bank, followed by the placement of wooden posts. Later, the iconic stone structures were added. First the smaller bluestones, transported from Wales over 150 miles away, and then the larger sarsen stones that form the familiar outer circle and inner trilithons. From an engineering perspective, the construction is impressive, but not inexplicable. Archaeologists have proposed methods involving sledges, rollers, and human labour, possibly aided by simple machines like levers. Experimental archaeology has demonstrated that, with enough coordination and time, these stones could have been moved and erected using tools available at the time, so the how is largely understood. The question, as with many of these structures, is why. One of the most widely accepted explanations is that Stonehenge had a ceremonial or ritual function. The site aligns with certain astronomical events, most notably the summer solstice, when the sun rises directly over a particular stone known as the heel stone, casting light into the center of the circle. This alignment suggests that the builders had an understanding of solar cycles and may have used the site to mark important times of the year. There's also evidence of burials in and around the site, indicating that it may have served as a kind of ceremonial landscape connected to death, ancestry, or spiritual practice. Nearby sites, such as Durrington Walls, appear to have been part of a larger complex, possibly used for gatherings, feasts, and rituals that extended beyond the stones themselves. From this perspective, Stonehenge fits within a broader pattern of prehistoric monuments that combine social, spiritual, and astronomical elements. It becomes less of an isolated mystery and more of a piece within a larger cultural framework. And yet, even within that framework, there are details that invite further thought. For example, the transportation of the bluestones. These stones originated in the Preseli Hills of Wales, a considerable distance from the site. Moving them would have required significant effort, not just physically, but logistically. Planning routes, coordinating labour, maintaining the integrity of the stones over long distances. It raises the question of why those particular stones were chosen, and why it was important to bring them from so far away. Some researchers suggest that the stones themselves may have held symbolic or cultural significance, perhaps associated with the region they came from. Others propose that their acoustic properties, the way they resonate when struck, might have played a role in their selection. These ideas don't contradict the ceremonial explanation, but they add layers to it. Then there's the precision of the layout. While Stonehenge is not perfectly symmetrical by modern engineering standards, its design reflects a clear understanding of geometry and alignment. The positioning of the stones, the spacing between them, the way they frame certain sightlines. All of this suggests intentional planning. But the exact purpose of that planning remains interpretive. Was it primarily a calendar? A place to track the movement of the sun and perhaps the moon? Or was the alignment more symbolic, a way of connecting the structure to the cycles of nature, rather than measuring them in a strict sense? There have been more speculative interpretations over time. Some have suggested that Stonehenge functioned as a kind of ancient observatory, capable of predicting eclipses or other complex astronomical events. Others have proposed that it was a site of healing, based on the presence of certain artifacts and the idea that people traveled there from distant regions. And then, of course, there are more unconventional theories, ideas involving lost technologies or external influences. These tend to move beyond the available evidence, introducing elements that aren't supported by the archaeological record. From a grounded perspective, they're less compelling, not because they're impossible in an abstract sense, but because they don't align with what we can verify. Still, even when we stay within the bounds of established research, the picture is not entirely complete, because Stonehenge doesn't come with a written explanation. There are no records from its builders describing its purpose, its meaning, or its use. Everything we understand about it is reconstructed from physical evidence, comparative analysis, and informed interpretation. And that process, by its nature, leaves room for uncertainty. Not unlimited uncertainty, but enough to keep the question open. There's also the broader context to consider. Stonehenge is not the only monument of its kind. Across Europe and beyond, there are stone circles, standing stones, and earthworks that share certain features, circular layouts, alignments with celestial events, evidence of communal activity. This suggests that the people who built Stonehenge were part of a wider tradition, one that placed importance on landscape, orientation, and shared space. But even within that tradition, Stonehenge stands out. Its scale, its complexity, the effort involved in its construction. It feels significant. And that sense of significance is part of what keeps the mystery alive. Because when something appears to have required so much intention, so much coordination, we naturally look for a purpose that matches that scale. Something equally defined, equally clear. But sometimes, that clarity isn't available. Sometimes, what remains is a combination of strong evidence and open interpretation. A structure that clearly meant something, but doesn't tell us exactly what. And maybe that's where the deeper reflection begins. Not in trying to force a single explanation, but in considering how meaning itself can be layered. How a place can serve multiple functions, practical, symbolic, social, all at once. How those functions can shift over time as different groups interact with the same space in different ways. In that sense, Stonehenge might not be a mystery because we lack a single answer. It might be a mystery because it doesn't reduce to one. Because it exists at the intersection of many possible meanings, each supported by different pieces of evidence, none of them fully exclusive. And once again, we find ourselves in that steady, familiar place, looking at something real, something well documented, something studied in detail, and still noticing the edges where understanding becomes interpretation. So as we move forward, let that idea stay with you. Not every mystery is about something hidden. Sometimes it's about something visible that we're still learning how to understand, because the next one takes us somewhere colder, more remote, a place where the environment itself becomes part of the mystery, and where what was found raised questions that are still being carefully examined. There's a different kind of stillness in places where the environment itself limits what can be known. Cold, remote regions have a way of preserving certain details while erasing others, creating a kind of selective record. footprints can remain frozen in place, while other traces disappear beneath snow or time. Objects can be left exactly where they were, but the reasons behind them fade, becoming harder to reconstruct with certainty. And in that kind of setting, when something unusual happens, the result isn't always a complete story. It's a collection of fragments, held together by careful analysis, and a few unanswered questions. One of the most well-documented examples of this kind of mystery is the Dyatlov Pass incident. In early 1959, a group of experienced hikers set out on an expedition in the northern Ural Mountains of what was then the Soviet Union. There were 9 members in the group, led by Igor Dyatlov, and by all accounts, they were well prepared. Their route was challenging, but not beyond their skill level. They carried the necessary equipment, documented their journey with photographs and journals, and followed a plan that had been approved by local authorities. At some point during the night of February 1st or early February 2nd, something happened. When the group failed to return on schedule, a search effort was eventually launched. What rescuers found was not a typical accident site. The group's tent was located on a slope of a mountain known as Kholat Syakhl, which translates roughly to Dead Mountain. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not unzipped, not damaged from the outside, but sliced through, as if the occupants had needed to exit quickly. Outside the tent, footprints were visible in the snow, leading away from the campsite. Some were barefoot. Others showed only socks. The tracks suggested that the group had left in an orderly fashion, not running, but moving with purpose, away from the tent and down the slope. The first bodies were found some distance away, near a tree line. 2 of the hikers were discovered under a cedar tree, dressed lightly for the conditions, showing signs of having attempted to build a small fire. Nearby, branches had been broken from the tree, possibly to gather wood or to gain a better vantage point. As the search continued, more bodies were found scattered between the tree and the tent, as if they had been trying to return. The remaining 4 were located later, in a ravine further into the forest, buried under deeper snow. Now, from a mainstream investigative perspective, several key factors have been identified. The most widely accepted explanation today involves a combination of environmental conditions and human response. Specifically, a type of avalanche, not a large dramatic one, but a slab avalanche, has been proposed as a likely trigger. In this scenario, a layer of snow above the tent may have become unstable and shifted, creating pressure on the structure. Even a relatively small slide could have caused enough disturbance to alarm the hikers, especially if they believed a larger avalanche was imminent. Faced with that possibility, the group may have made a rapid decision to leave the tent immediately. Cutting the tent from the inside would have been the fastest way to exit if the entrance was blocked or if time felt critical. Once outside, they may have moved downhill to create distance from the perceived danger. This explanation accounts for several elements: the damaged tent, the direction of the footprints, the lack of heavy clothing on some of the hikers. In a situation where they believed they needed to evacuate quickly, they may not have had time to fully dress. But as with the other mysteries we've explored, there are details that complicate the picture. For example, the injuries found on some of the hikers. While several of the bodies showed signs consistent with hypothermia, a few had more severe trauma: fractured ribs, a crushed skull. These injuries were described as significant, but without the external wounds you might expect from a direct impact. No clear signs of a struggle, no obvious weapon, no indication of an external attacker. The mainstream interpretation of these injuries suggests that they could have resulted from environmental factors, falls into the ravine, or the pressure of snow collapsing over them. In a harsh, uneven terrain, especially in low visibility, it's possible that individuals could have fallen or been subjected to forces that caused internal damage without leaving extensive external marks. There's also the matter of the timeline. The footprints leading away from the tent suggest a relatively calm departure, not a chaotic escape. If the group was reacting to an immediate threat, why do the tracks appear so orderly? Why move in a controlled manner rather than running? One possibility is that the threat, while serious, was not instantaneous. The hikers may have believed they had enough time to move deliberately, even if they felt urgency. Another is that their training and experience led them to respond in a disciplined way, even under stress. Then there are smaller details, often mentioned in discussions of the case. Reports of elevated radiation levels on some clothing, the condition of the bodies, the absence of certain items that might have been expected. Each of these has been examined, and in many cases, there are grounded explanations. Background radiation from equipment, environmental degradation, the effects of time and exposure. But taken together, they contribute to a sense that the full sequence of events is not entirely clear. Over the years, more speculative theories have been proposed. Ideas involving military testing, infrasound-induced panic, even more unconventional scenarios. These interpretations attempt to account for the more unusual aspects of the case, but they often rely on assumptions that extend beyond the available evidence. From a grounded perspective, the combination of a slab avalanche, environmental exposure, and a series of difficult decisions under extreme conditions remains the most consistent explanation. And yet, even within that framework, there's space for reflection. Because the Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just a mystery about what happened. It's a reminder of how complex real-world situations can be, how multiple factors, environment, perception, decision-making, can interact in ways that are difficult to reconstruct after the fact. Imagine the conditions: darkness, cold, wind, the uncertainty of whether the ground beneath you is stable, the need to act quickly with limited information in an environment where small mistakes can have significant consequences. In that context, the sequence of events doesn't have to involve anything extraordinary to become difficult to fully understand. It just requires a series of moments where decisions are made, based on what is perceived at the time. And once those moments pass, what remains is a partial record. Footprints, a damaged tent, scattered belongings, clues, but not a complete narrative. And that brings us back to that steady, familiar place, where explanation and uncertainty exist side by side, where the goal isn't to force a single answer, but to look carefully at what we know and to acknowledge what we don't. Because sometimes, the most grounded understanding isn't a perfect reconstruction. It's an acceptance that certain details may remain just out of reach. So as we move forward, let that thought settle in. Not everything unresolved points to something unknown. Sometimes it points to the limits of observation and the complexity of real events. And the next mystery carries that idea in a different direction, into something found in stone, something ancient, something that seems to suggest a pattern, but leaves us asking whether that pattern is intentional or something we're only beginning to interpret. There's a quiet shift that happens when a mystery isn't tied to a single event, but to a pattern that appears across time. Not something that unfolds in one moment, but something that seems to repeat, or at least echo, carved into stone, scattered across different locations, separated by geography and culture, and yet carrying similarities that are difficult to ignore at first glance. The kind of thing that makes you pause, not because it's immediately unexplainable, but because it invites a second look. One example that often comes up in this context is the Peary Race map. At first, it appears to be what you'd expect, an early 16th century map, created by Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis. It shows parts of Europe, Africa, and South America drawn with a level of detail that reflects the geographical knowledge available at the time, likely compiled from earlier sources, including maps used by explorers like Columbus. From a mainstream historical perspective, the map is not a mystery in terms of its origin. We know who created it, roughly when it was made, and the general sources it drew from. Piri Reis himself even noted that he used multiple earlier maps, some of which no longer exist, to construct his version. But over time, a specific claim began to circulate, that the map appears to depict the coastline of Antarctica, centuries before the continent was officially discovered in 1820. At first glance, this idea seems intriguing. There is a portion of the map that, when viewed in a certain way, appears to resemble the shape of Antarctica's coastline, and in some interpretations, it's suggested that this coastline is shown without ice, implying knowledge of the landmass beneath the ice sheet. Something that, according to this interpretation, would require a level of surveying far beyond what was available in the 1500s. However, when we examine this more closely, the mainstream explanation offers a more grounded perspective. Cartographic distortion is a key factor. Early maps often combined information from different sources, each with its own inaccuracies, and then projected that information onto a flat surface in ways that could significantly alter shapes and proportions. Coastlines could be stretched, compressed, rotated, especially when the underlying data was incomplete or inconsistent. In the case of the Piri Reis map, most scholars agree that the southern landmass depicted is not Antarctica, but rather a distorted representation of the eastern coastline of South America, extended and curved in a way that reflects the limitations of the mapping techniques used at the time. There's also the matter of scale and orientation. When the map is analysed using proper geographic projections, the supposed alignment with Antarctica becomes much less precise. Features that seem to match at first glance begin to diverge when examined more rigorously. So from a scientific and historical standpoint, the idea that the Piri Reis map shows Antarctica in detail is not supported by the evidence. And yet, the persistence of that interpretation is interesting, not because it's correct, but because it highlights something about how we perceive patterns. When we look at complex shapes, coastlines for example, the human brain is very good at finding similarities, even when those similarities are partial or coincidental. It's a form of pattern recognition that helps us make sense of the world, but it can also lead us to see connections that aren't actually there in a meaningful way. This doesn't mean the pattern is entirely imagined. It means the interpretation of the pattern may extend beyond what the data supports. And that brings us to a broader question. How do we distinguish between a meaningful pattern and one that emerges from the way we're looking at the information? Because this isn't limited to maps. It applies to many areas where data is incomplete or open to interpretation. Ancient carvings, alignments of structures, even the arrangement of stars in the sky. When we don't have a full picture, the mind naturally tries to fill in the gaps, to create coherence, to find structure. Sometimes that leads to genuine insight. Other times, it leads to conclusions that feel convincing, but don't hold up under closer examination. There's also the historical context to consider. During the age of exploration, maps were not just tools for navigation. They were also expressions of knowledge, power, and sometimes speculation. Cartographers would include regions that were rumored but not confirmed, or extend known coastlines into unknown areas based on limited reports. In some cases, entire landmasses were drawn based on second-hand accounts or assumptions. So the presence of an unusual or unexpected shape on a map from that period doesn't necessarily indicate hidden knowledge. It may simply reflect the process of assembling incomplete information into a coherent whole. Still, even with that understanding, there's something quietly compelling about the idea of lost sources. Piri Reis himself mentioned that he used earlier maps, some of which are now lost. That means the map we have is, in a sense, a fragment of a larger chain of knowledge. We can trace parts of it, but not all of it. And that introduces a small but persistent gap. Not a gap that points to something extraordinary, but a gap that reminds us we don't have every piece. And once again, we find ourselves in that familiar space. The mainstream explanation is strong. It accounts for the features of the map using known principles of cartography and historical context. It doesn't require unknown civilizations or advanced technologies. At the same time, the presence of missing sources, combined with the human tendency to find patterns, keeps the discussion open. Not in terms of what the map shows, but in terms of how we interpret what we see. And maybe that's the deeper thread here. Not whether the map contains hidden knowledge, but how easily the idea of hidden knowledge can take shape when we're working with incomplete information. Because the mind doesn't like gaps. It prefers connections. But not every connection is meaningful in the way it first appears. So as we move forward, let that idea settle in. The difference between what is observed and what is inferred. Between the data itself and the story we build around it. Because the next mystery brings us back into the natural world again, but in a way that challenges not just what we see, but what we hear. Something that echoes across distances, recorded, analyzed, and still not fully identified. There's something about sound that makes a mystery feel closer. You don't need to see anything. You don't need a structure or a signal printed on paper or a visual pattern carved into the ground. A sound can exist on its own, just a vibration moving through space, and yet it can carry a presence that feels almost physical. And when that sound doesn't quite match anything familiar, it lingers in a different way. In 1997, deep in the Pacific Ocean, a network of underwater microphones operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration detected something unusual. These hydrophones were originally part of a system designed to monitor submarine activity during the Cold War, but over time, they became valuable tools for studying oceanic phenomena, earthquakes, volcanic activity, and even marine life. On one particular day, a sound was recorded that stood out from the rest. It was loud, extremely loud, one of the most powerful underwater sounds ever detected. It had a distinctive frequency pattern, rising in pitch over time, lasting for about a minute. And perhaps most notably, it was picked up by multiple sensors, thousands of kilometers apart, suggesting that its source was both strong and far-reaching. This sound became known as the bloop. Now, from a scientific perspective, the first step was to compare the bloop to known sources. The ocean is not a quiet place. It's filled with sounds, the movement of tectonic plates, the cracking of ice, the calls of whales, the shifting of underwater currents. Many of these sounds can travel vast distances, especially in the deep ocean, where conditions allow for efficient transmission of low-frequency waves. One of the initial considerations was biological. Certain marine animals, particularly large whales, are capable of producing powerful vocalizations. Blue whales, for example, emit calls that can travel across entire ocean basins. So the idea that the bloop might be a biological sound wasn't unreasonable. But there was a complication. The frequency and amplitude of the bloop didn't match known whale calls. It was significantly more powerful, and its acoustic signature didn't align with established patterns of marine life communication. That doesn't necessarily rule out a biological source. It's possible that unknown or less studied species could produce sounds we haven't catalogued, but it made that explanation less certain. Another possibility involved geological activity. Underwater earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the movement of tectonic plates can generate strong acoustic signals. These are often characterized by specific patterns, depending on the type of activity and the materials involved. Over time, as more data was collected and analyzed, a more grounded explanation began to take shape. Scientists at NOAA eventually suggested that the bloop was most likely caused by the cracking and movement of large ice formations, specifically icequakes. When massive pieces of ice fracture or shift, they can release significant energy, producing sounds that travel through the ocean over long distances. This explanation fits several key aspects of the bloop. The location of the sound's origin, in the southern Pacific near Antarctica, aligns with regions where large ice masses are present. The frequency characteristics of the sound can be consistent with ice-related events. And importantly, similar sounds have been recorded since then, showing patterns that support the icequake hypothesis. So from a mainstream standpoint, the bloop is no longer considered an unexplained mystery. It's understood as a natural phenomenon, part of the dynamic processes occurring in Earth's polar regions. And yet, there's still something about it that invites a second look, not because the explanation is weak, but because of what it reveals about how we interpret unfamiliar data. When the bloop was first detected, it didn't match known categories. It was louder, more distinct, more unusual than the typical sounds being monitored. And in that moment, before further analysis, before additional data, it occupied a space of uncertainty. And in that space, speculation naturally expanded. Some interpretations suggested unknown sea creatures. Others leaned into more unconventional ideas. These interpretations weren't supported by evidence, but they emerged because the sound itself felt different. Over time, as more information became available, the explanation shifted. The unknown became known, or at least more clearly understood, and the mystery, in its original form, began to dissolve. But the process itself is what's interesting, because it shows how a single piece of data can move through different stages of understanding. First, observation, then comparison, then hypothesis, then refinement, and finally, a working explanation that fits within the broader framework of what we know. The bloop didn't remain unexplained, but for a time, it was. And that temporary uncertainty is part of what makes it compelling. There's also a broader context to consider. The ocean, especially the deep ocean, is still one of the least explored environments on Earth. Large areas remain unmapped. Many species have yet to be identified. Acoustic monitoring gives us a way to listen to that environment, but it's still a relatively indirect method. We're interpreting vibrations, translating them into data, and then trying to match that data to known sources. So when a sound doesn't immediately match, it highlights the limits of our current catalogue, not in a dramatic way, just quietly. And that brings us back to a familiar theme. Not everything unknown stays unknown, but the period of not knowing can still be meaningful, because it shows us where our understanding is still developing, where new data can shift our perspective, where something that initially feels unusual can, over time, find its place within a larger pattern. At the same time, it's worth noting that not every sound has been fully explained. There are other recordings, less famous, less dramatic, that remain under study. Some may eventually be linked to known processes. Others may reveal new aspects of the ocean's behavior. And that's the steady rhythm of scientific exploration. Observation leading to questions. Questions leading to investigation. Investigation leading to understanding, or sometimes to better questions. So as we move forward, let that rhythm stay with you. The idea that mystery isn't always a fixed state. Sometimes it's a phase, a moment where something hasn't yet been fully placed within our understanding. And the next mystery shifts us again into something that appears in the sky, but not as a structured object, not as a tracked phenomenon, but as something more diffuse, more fleeting, and just as quietly puzzling. There's a certain kind of mystery that doesn't leave behind anything you can hold, measure, or return to later. No structure, no artifact, no recording that captures it in full detail. Instead, it exists in moments, brief, often unexpected, and difficult to replicate. Something appears, sometimes witnessed by multiple people, sometimes captured partially on camera, and then it's gone. Not in a dramatic way, not with a clear beginning or end, but simply no longer there. One of the more well-known examples of this kind of phenomenon is something often referred to as ball lightning. Unlike typical lightning, which follows a fast branching path from cloud to ground or within clouds, ball lightning is described as a glowing, spherical object, sometimes small, sometimes larger, that appears during or after a storm. It can hover, move slowly, change direction, and in some reports, even pass through windows or walls before disappearing. Now, from a mainstream scientific perspective, ball lightning is not considered purely anecdotal. There are enough consistent reports across different regions and time periods to suggest that the phenomenon does occur in some form. In fact, there have been a few instances where ball-like luminous events have been captured on video or observed under controlled conditions, though these are rare. The challenge lies in explaining exactly what it is. Several hypotheses have been proposed, each grounded in known physical principles, but none universally accepted as the definitive explanation. One idea involves plasma, ionized gas that can emit light and behave in complex ways under certain conditions. In this model, ball lightning could be a form of stable or semi-stable plasma created by a lightning strike, sustained briefly by electromagnetic fields or chemical reactions in the air. Another hypothesis suggests that it could be related to silicon vapor. When lightning strikes soil, especially soil rich in silicon compounds, it can vaporize material and create a cloud of charged particles. As these particles oxidize in the air, they might produce a glowing, spherical effect that persists for a short time. There are also models involving microwave radiation, where energy from a lightning strike becomes trapped in a localized region, forming a kind of standing wave that maintains a visible sphere. Each of these explanations accounts for certain aspects of the reports: the glow, the movement, the duration. But none of them fully explains every detail described in eyewitness accounts. And that's where the uncertainty begins to settle in. Because when you look at the reports themselves, there's a wide range of variation. Some describe small, golf ball-sized spheres that flicker briefly and vanish. Others report larger objects, the size of a basketball or more, moving slowly through open spaces or even inside buildings. Some accounts mention a quiet hum or a crackling sound. Others describe sudden disappearance, sometimes accompanied by a sharp noise, sometimes without any sound at all. There are even reports of ball lightning interacting with objects, passing through glass without breaking it, or leaving behind scorch marks on surfaces. These details are difficult to reconcile with a single simple model. Now, it's important to approach eyewitness reports carefully. Human perception, especially during unusual or stressful events like storms, can be influenced by lighting conditions, expectations, and the limitations of memory. What is seen in a brief moment may be interpreted differently upon reflection. But at the same time, the consistency of certain core features, the spherical shape, the glow, the movement, suggests that there is a real phenomenon underlying at least some of these accounts. And once again, we find ourselves in that familiar space. We have observations. We have plausible explanations. But we don't have a complete, unified theory that accounts for every detail. And perhaps more interestingly, we don't have a reliable way to reproduce the phenomenon on demand. In science, reproducibility is key. Being able to create and observe something under controlled conditions allows for systematic study, measurement, and refinement of understanding. With ball lightning, that reproducibility has been limited. There have been laboratory experiments that produce similar effects, glowing plasma spheres, for example, but these are not exact matches for the full range of reported behavior, so the phenomenon remains partially understood, not unknown, but not fully resolved. And that leads to a quieter, more reflective question. What does it mean when something exists at the edge of reproducibility? Because there are many natural phenomena that are difficult to study precisely because they don't occur in predictable ways. Rare atmospheric events, deep sea occurrences, transient astronomical signals, all of these present challenges not because they defy explanation, but because they don't happen often enough or under conditions that are easy to control. Ball lightning seems to fall into that category. It's not that it contradicts physics, it's that it operates in a narrow window of conditions that we're still learning how to define. And in that sense, the mystery isn't about something outside the natural world. It's about a part of the natural world that we haven't fully mapped yet. There's also something interesting about the way these kinds of phenomena are remembered. Because they don't leave behind physical evidence in most cases, they rely on description. On the ability of someone to recall what they saw, to translate a brief, unusual moment into words. And that process introduces variability. Different people notice different details. They use different language. They focus on different aspects of the experience. So over time, the collective description becomes a kind of composite, a blend of consistent features and individual variations. And within that composite, the core of the mystery remains, a glowing sphere, appearing unexpectedly, moving in ways that don't quite match our expectations, and then disappearing. No clear trace, no simple explanation that covers every case. Just enough information to suggest something real is happening, and just enough uncertainty to keep the question open. So as we move forward, let that idea settle in. Not everything unexplained is beyond understanding. Sometimes it's simply not fully understood yet. And that difference matters, because it keeps the focus on observation, on careful analysis, on the gradual process of learning, rather than jumping to conclusions that go beyond what the evidence supports. And the next mystery takes us into a similar space. Something that has been recorded, studied, and debated for decades. Something that appears in remote landscapes, leaves behind physical traces, and still resists a single, clear explanation. There's a certain kind of mystery that forms when something leaves a mark, but not a message. A pattern appears, pressed into the landscape with clear physical presence, yet without any direct indication of how it was made or why. It's not fleeting like a sound or a light in the sky. It stays, at least for a time, allowing people to walk through it, measure it, photograph it. And still, even after careful examination, the explanation doesn't always feel complete. One of the most widely recognized examples of this phenomenon is the appearance of crop circles. These formations have been reported in various parts of the world, but they are especially associated with rural areas of England. Typically appearing overnight, they involve crops, often wheat or barley, that have been bent down to create intricate geometric patterns. Circles, spirals, fractal-like shapes, sometimes simple, sometimes highly complex. From a mainstream perspective, the explanation for crop circles is largely grounded and well documented. Many have been shown to be human-made, created using relatively simple tools, boards, ropes, measuring lines, and a careful process of planning and execution. In fact, there have been individuals and groups who have openly demonstrated how these patterns can be created, sometimes even reproducing complex designs within a single night. This explanation accounts for a significant number of cases. The techniques are practical, the materials are accessible, and the results match what has been observed in many documented formations. In that sense, crop circles are not inherently mysterious in terms of their basic mechanism. But as with the other topics we've explored, the details invite a closer look, because not all crop circles are identical in their characteristics. Some formations exhibit features that have been described as unusual. For example, the way the crops are bent rather than broken, or the presence of subtle changes in the soil or plant structure. In certain cases, researchers have reported variations in electromagnetic readings, or the presence of small metallic particles within the affected areas. Now, these observations have been studied, and in many instances, they can be explained through natural or human-related processes. Plants can bend without breaking under certain conditions, especially if pressure is applied gradually. Soil composition can vary, and environmental factors can influence measurements. Metallic particles can originate from a variety of sources, including agricultural activity or atmospheric deposition. So while these features may appear unusual at first glance, they don't necessarily require an unknown cause. Still, there are formations that stand out for their complexity. Patterns that involve precise geometry, multiple layers of design, and a level of symmetry that seems difficult to achieve quickly, especially under the cover of darkness. Some of these designs include mathematical elements, ratios, repeating sequences, structures that resemble known geometric principles. And this is where the conversation begins to shift, not away from the mainstream explanation, but into a more nuanced space. Because while it's clear that humans are capable of creating complex crop circles, the question becomes one of scale and consistency. How much time would it take to produce certain formations? What level of coordination would be required? How do environmental conditions, darkness, terrain, weather, affect the process? These questions don't invalidate the human-made explanation, but they do highlight the effort involved. And that effort, in some cases, seems considerable. There's also the matter of timing. Many crop circles are reported to appear overnight, sometimes within a very narrow window of time. While this is entirely possible with a coordinated group and a clear plan, it adds another layer to the process, one that requires not just skill, but efficiency. Over time, more speculative interpretations have emerged. Some suggest that crop circles could be the result of natural energy patterns interacting with the environment, electromagnetic fields, atmospheric conditions, or other processes not fully understood. Others propose more unconventional ideas, including external influences or unknown technologies. From a grounded perspective, these interpretations tend to extend beyond the available evidence. They introduce mechanisms that are not clearly supported by reproducible data. And while they attempt to account for the more complex formations, they often do so by adding layers of assumption rather than simplifying the explanation. Still, the persistence of these ideas is worth noting, not because they're necessarily correct, but because they reflect a response to something that feels intricate. When a pattern appears that seems highly ordered, highly detailed, the mind naturally looks for a cause that matches that level of order. It's a kind of intuitive reasoning, complexity suggesting intention, precision suggesting design. And in many cases, that intuition leads back to human creators. Artists, engineers, enthusiasts who see the field as a canvas and who take on the challenge of producing something that appears, at first glance, almost beyond reach. There's something quietly fascinating about that. The idea that a group of people working in the dark with simple tools can create patterns that spark global curiosity, that the boundary between what seems possible and what seems unlikely can be explored through careful planning and execution. At the same time, the existence of a clear explanation for many crop circles doesn't eliminate every question. Because as with the other mysteries we've explored, there's a difference between understanding the general mechanism and accounting for every specific instance. Some formations are well documented, with known creators and clear processes. Others, less so. And in those cases, the explanation may still be the same, but the details are harder to verify. Once again, we find ourselves in that steady, familiar space. A strong, grounded framework that explains the majority of observations, and a smaller set of instances where the information is incomplete, where the process is not directly observed, where the pattern exists, but the method remains inferred, not unknown, just not fully documented. And maybe that's the quiet thread running through all of this, the difference between what we can confirm and what we can reasonably conclude, between direct evidence and interpretation based on patterns. Because in the end, crop circles may not be a mystery in the sense of something unexplained, but they are a reflection of how easily patterns can capture attention, how they invite interpretation, how they sit at the intersection of creativity, perception, and analysis. And as we move toward the final part, we'll step back slightly and look at the broader picture. Not just the individual mysteries, but what they have in common, what they reveal, not just about the world, but about the way we understand it. If you take a moment now and let all of these sit together, the signal, the lines in the desert, the abandoned ship, the presence in the night, the disappearances, the mechanism, the lights in the sky, the sounds in the ocean, the patterns in fields, something starts to shift. Not in any dramatic way, not as a sudden realization, but more like a gradual alignment. A sense that the mysteries themselves are different on the surface, but underneath, they follow similar contours. Because in each case, what we're really looking at is not just an unexplained event. We're looking at the boundary of observation, the point where something happens, and our ability to fully capture it, measure it, or repeat it, falls just short. And that boundary has a pattern of its own. It tends to appear in environments that are difficult to monitor continuously. Deep space, remote deserts, open oceans, isolated mountains, the edges of sleep, even the night sky, where distance and perspective introduce layers of uncertainty. These are all places, or states, where information is partial by default. And when information is partial, interpretation begins. That's not a flaw, it's a function. The human mind is designed to take incomplete data and form a coherent picture. It fills in gaps, connects points, looks for structure. Most of the time, that process works remarkably well. It allows us to navigate complex environments, to make decisions quickly, to recognize patterns that matter. But in these edge cases, that same process can lead to multiple possible interpretations. And that's where the quiet tension comes from. Not because something impossible is happening, but because several plausible explanations exist at once, and none of them fully close the loop. Take the wow signal, for example. A single data point, strong, narrow band, aligned with what we might expect from an intentional transmission, and yet never repeated. The mainstream explanation leans toward natural or terrestrial sources, but the lack of repetition keeps the question open. Not wide open, just enough. Or the Nazca lines. We understand how they were made. We have strong theories about their cultural context. And still, when you step back and look at their scale, their placement, the way they interact with the landscape, there's room to ask what they meant beyond the immediate function. The Mary Celeste gives us a different angle, a complete structure, intact, with a missing narrative. The physical evidence is there, but the sequence of decisions that led to that outcome remains partially obscured, not unknowable, but not fully reconstructable. And then there's something like sleep paralysis, not a single event, but a recurring experience, neurologically grounded, well studied in terms of mechanism, and yet, the consistency of certain subjective elements, the presence, the awareness, the intensity, invites a closer look at how perception operates when the brain is between states. Across all of these, there's a common thread. We have enough information to form explanations, but not enough to eliminate uncertainty entirely. And that creates a kind of balance, a space where curiosity can exist without urgency, where questions can be held, examined, revisited, without needing to resolve immediately. Because if you think about it, the goal of understanding isn't always to reach a final answer as quickly as possible. Sometimes it's to refine the question, to look at something from different angles, to test different interpretations, to see where they align with the evidence and where they don't. And in that process, something interesting happens. The mystery doesn't disappear. It changes. It becomes more defined, more grounded, less about the unknown in a broad sense, and more about specific gaps in knowledge. And those gaps are where progress tends to happen. Not all at once, not in a straight line, but gradually, through observation, comparison, and careful reasoning. There's also something else worth noticing. Many of these mysteries persist, not because they defy explanation entirely, but because they exist at the intersection of multiple disciplines. Astronomy and signal processing, archaeology and cultural interpretation, oceanography and acoustics, neuroscience and subjective experience. When a phenomenon touches more than one domain, it often requires a more integrated approach to fully understand. And that integration doesn't always happen immediately. It takes time for different fields to connect their insights, to build a more complete picture. So in a way, the persistence of these mysteries reflects not just the limits of observation, but the complexity of the systems involved. And maybe that's where the calm comes from. Not in the idea that everything will be solved, but in the recognition that understanding is an ongoing process, that it's okay for some questions to remain open. That uncertainty doesn't have to be unsettling. It can be steady, even grounding, when it's approached with curiosity rather than urgency. Because when you remove the pressure to conclude, what's left is the ability to observe more carefully, to notice details that might otherwise be overlooked, to appreciate the structure of a problem, even if the solution isn't fully clear. And that's where all of these come together, not as separate mysteries, but as examples of how the world presents itself at the edges of what we know. Signals that appear once, patterns that outlast their creators, events that leave behind fragments, experiences that blur the line between internal and external. Each one, a reminder that the boundary of understanding isn't fixed. It shifts, expands, refines itself over time, and we're always somewhere along that edge. So as we move into the final part, we won't be introducing something entirely new. Instead, we'll step back one more time and look at what it means to sit with these kinds of questions, not as problems to solve, but as something else entirely, something quieter, If you've made it this far, something subtle has probably already happened. Not a realization in the usual sense, not a single idea clicking into place, but more like a gradual shift in how these things feel. The mysteries themselves haven't changed. The signal is still just a signal. The lines are still in the desert. The ship is still empty. The sound still echoes somewhere in the ocean's past. And yet, the way they sit in your mind might feel a little different now, a little less urgent, a little less like something that needs to be resolved, and a little more like something you can simply observe. Because if there's one thread running through everything we've explored, it's not that the world is filled with unexplainable things, it's that our understanding of it is always in progress. There are layers to how we interpret events, layers to how we gather evidence, layers to how we decide what counts as a complete explanation. And most of the time, those layers work together smoothly. We observe something, we test it, we refine our understanding, and eventually, it settles into place. It becomes part of the known world, something we can reference, predict, rely on. But sometimes, that process pauses. Not because it fails, but because it hasn't finished. And in that pause, the mystery exists, not as something outside of reality, but as something within it that hasn't been fully mapped yet. Think again about the wow signal, a moment of data, clear and distinct, but isolated. It doesn't rewrite what we know about the universe. It doesn't confirm anything extraordinary. It simply sits there, a single point that doesn't yet connect to a larger pattern, or the Antikythera mechanism, a device that clearly fits within the capabilities of its time, and yet suggests a level of application that we don't fully see elsewhere. It doesn't break history, but it gently reshapes how we think about it. Even something as grounded as the Dyatlov Pass incident carries that same quality. A sequence of events that can be explained in parts: environment, decision-making, physical conditions, but when viewed as a whole, still leaves a sense that not every detail has been fully resolved. And then there are the quieter, more personal edges. Experiences like sleep paralysis, where the mechanism is understood, but the lived experience retains a depth that's harder to fully translate into explanation. Moments where perception and reality overlap in ways that feel more complex than a single model can capture. Across all of these, the pattern becomes clearer. Mystery isn't always about something hidden. Sometimes it's about something partially revealed. Something we can see, measure, describe, but not yet place with complete certainty. And when you approach it that way, the feeling changes. It becomes less about chasing answers and more about noticing how understanding develops. Because every mystery we've talked about exists on a kind of timeline. At one point, it was completely unknown. Then it was observed, then partially explained, and maybe, eventually, it becomes fully understood. Or maybe it remains in that middle space, where explanation and uncertainty coexist. There's no requirement that everything must move all the way to the end of that timeline. Some things do. Some things take longer. And some stay open, not because they can't be understood, but because the conditions for understanding them completely haven't aligned yet. And that's not a flaw in the system. It's part of it. Because if everything were immediately clear, immediately categorized, immediately resolved, there would be no edge to explore, no place where curiosity has room to move. And that edge, the space between what is known and what is still being examined, is where all of these stories live. Not in the realm of the impossible, not in the realm of pure speculation, but in that quieter, more grounded space where questions are still allowed to exist. And maybe that's why they feel relaxing. Not because they're simple, but because they don't demand closure. They allow you to think, to consider, to turn ideas over slowly, without the pressure of reaching a final answer. They invite you to sit with the details, to notice the patterns, to recognize the limits of what's currently understood, and to be okay with that. Because in the end, the world isn't divided cleanly into what is known and what is unknown. It's a spectrum, a continuous movement from observation to understanding, with many points in between. And every so often, we encounter something that sits right in the middle of that spectrum, clear enough to see, unclear enough to question, and steady enough to simply exist as it is. So as you let all of this settle, there's no need to resolve anything. No need to decide what each mystery really means. Just let them remain where they are. Signals that appeared once, structures whose purpose is still being interpreted, events that left behind fragments instead of full narratives, experiences that blur the line between perception and explanation. Each one, a quiet reminder that understanding doesn't have to be complete to be meaningful, and that sometimes the most interesting place to be is right at the edge of it. And with that, we've reached the end of this exploration, not with a conclusion, but with a perspective, one that you can return to whenever something doesn't quite fit, whenever a question lingers just a little longer than expected, because those are the moments where curiosity begins and where it can continue without needing to end.